Welcome back to the Bitcoin 101 Blackboard series. This is James D'Angelo. You were looking at part 2 of how to make your own digital currency, or how to make Bitcoin, and all the problems that Satoshi Nakamoto had to deal with when making Bitcoin in 2008. If you haven't seen part 1, please go check that out first, because this is just following that one up. Here we go. So many people had developed some really beautiful digital currency, some great philosophy, but they couldn't solve this issue with double spending. So this is the double spending problem. And for digital, this was the big problem for anybody programming. And when Satoshi figured out how to solve that, he knew he stood a chance of releasing his currency and finding some acceptance. So what is the double spending problem? Well, let's talk about what digital means to most fields. Okay, so if you're a photographer or a musician, digital offers this really amazing and really tragic advantage of you can make perfect copies. In fact, you can make 1 billion perfect copies in a second. So digital has long been associated with the ability to copy something perfectly in such a way that someone can't even recognize it's not the original. So when you play the music on your CD, you don't go, God, I don't feel as close as that guy because his CD was pressed earlier. They're the exact same. Those CDs are fungible. This ability to copy something perfectly. So you can copy the CD and you can send it to your friend and he'll think that you were in that studio with the band, right? It's as good a copy. This ability for anyone to make a perfect copy is a real problem if you're trying to make money. Okay, so let's think about it. Alice has 5 Bitcoins. She has them. They're on her computer. She has the access to them, right? And now she's going to send those 5 Bitcoins to Bob. Well, if they actually reside on your computer in a way that we're familiar with, she'll send them to Bob just in the way that you would send a JPEG or an MP3. And when you send those JPEGs or MP3, you send a perfect copy. So the double spending problem is Alice sends 5 Bitcoins to Bob, gets 5 Bitcoins, and now both of you have 5 Bitcoins. And Alice can now send those 5 Bitcoins to Charlie. And now Charlie has 5 Bitcoins, and that's double spending, right? 5 Bitcoins, right? But you could see that double spending doesn't really mean double, it means infinite. So Alice can now send it out to David, Elijah, Susan, Satoshi, anybody, right? So this is really the infinite spending problem. And this was driving all the programmers of digital currency crazy. There was no way around this. And Satoshi's solution is actually devilishly simple, which is instead of actually keeping coins, he keeps references to these coins. And he keeps references to these coins on a thing that could be compared to a ledger. So he keeps this ledger. And on this ledger, if Alice sends those coins, she has to electronically talk to this ledger. So Alice sends Bob those coins. And what this ledger does is it notes that. Okay, so Bob's address and Alice's address have to be included in here. And this ledger has to be queried for any further transaction. So if Alice sends it to Bob and then she tries to send it to Charlie, the ledger says, no, Alice, you don't have those 5 Bitcoins anymore. Sorry, honey, days are over when you could spend as much as you want. And it seems so devilishly simple, right? He's created this ledger. And yeah, problem solved. Well, it's actually a really big problem with creating a ledger is who owns the ledger, right? Who owns this ledger? Because if Satoshi Nakamoto owns this ledger, well, we know what he can do. He can take his little eraser or he can just scribble it out. Well, Alice didn't send Bob that money. Alice sent that money to Satoshi, and he does whatever he wants. And Satoshi, of course, has 80 billion Bitcoins, and he wants to buy all the cars in the world, and he's bought the whole world, right? Anyone who controls this ledger would have to be a trusted third party. But this isn't the game that Satoshi was trying to play. He wanted to play a game where you didn't need a trusted third party. Okay, banks are trusted third party. When I send money to someone in a bank, the banks actually do this. They hold the ledger and they update it. And they get paid famously for protecting those ledgers. In fact, the problem is they get paid way too well. And Satoshi didn't want to have to incentivize someone as well as the banks, right? So he had to figure out how to keep this ledger out of the hands of one person. And this solution was his moment of genius. He took the ledger and he put the ledger on every computer that is mining Bitcoins. And in fact, that's what mining is updating and controlling this ledger. So he took one ledger and he has it copied, and now who knows, it might be copied 1,000,000 times. And each of those mining machines updates all the transactions continuously if they are continuing to mine. And so this ledger is queried, and all the computers through this distributed computing, right, this decentralized computing network will go, did Alice already spend money to Bob? 1,000,000 computer hard drives spinning up, and they come to a consensus. And they go, well, no one here has record that she's given that money before. So Alice can give the money to Bob. And that's okay. What Satoshi is doing is he's using the power of numbers, right? Just like when you drive down the street, most people in the other cars aren't trying to shoot out their window and kill you. Most of them aren't trying to drive off the side of the road and run you over. Most people are probably good. So if all the people working in the system come to some agreement that this was valid, well, he says, then it must be valid. So he's playing an actuary's game, right? And really, if you're an insurance person, all games are actuary games. But he's saying, by using the power of numbers, I can solve the double spending problem by having a ledger, and I can solve this third-party thing by distributing it to every computer. And this is a moment of genius. And this is going to change the way the world works. So now let's look back at some of the other problems that he had to face. So we've talked about minting the coins, and we've talked about double spending. Now we have to talk about a little issue about giving accounts, right? This is big. This is actually, we're going to talk about this in one of our big 5 series, is that if you don't have an ID, and lots of the world, could be 2 or 3 billion people don't have identification, well, you can't get an account. Satoshi didn't like that. He wanted everyone on Earth to be able to get an account. So he didn't want to have a third party, a bank or someone, approving someone for an account. He wanted everyone to have accounts. And once again, he did this by turning to the weirdest solution of all. And this is one of the weirdest things you'll ever see with Bitcoin. And we're going to talk about this in another video. But he turned to the power of large numbers. So Satoshi often turned to the power of large numbers and cryptography. And we're going to talk about how he gave accounts on this other page. So in order to give everyone on Earth an account, and you don't have to check them to see if they've got financial background or whatever, or you don't have to check them for anything, he had to once again turn to the power of large numbers. And in fact, when you look at how he solves problems, he's relying on basically 3 friends to make his currency. And those 3 friends are, well, he's making it digital, all right? So there's no cost in minting, it's internet ready, seismic advantages. We've already spoken a little bit about that. He's using cryptography, and we're going to talk about that much more fully in a bunch of other videos, but he's replacing a lot of the need for security guards and all that using cryptography. And most people use cryptography. Every time you send an email and stuff like that, there's some cryptography involved, okay? Bank transactions with each other are cryptographic, right? They're using the internet just like you are, but they're doing cryptography on both sides. So cryptography is fairly standard. But this idea of using extremely large numbers is fairly novel. So once again, he's developing his trust in the ledger, right? He had his ledger, and he's using extremely large numbers. So he's having everyone who feels like maintain the ledger. So the ledger's not in one spot, it's in 1,000,000 spots. Using the actuary type thinking, right? In insurance, like what are the percentages that a bad person will be able to convince 1,000,000 people to be able to do some bad thing? And the odds seem very, very, very low. And there's more than just that tiny amount built in, but that's the general idea. Now he's got to create accounts, okay? And so to use extremely large numbers, he said, well, let's make a lot of accounts. Okay, so let's make the amount of accounts that maybe there are grains of sand on Earth. Okay, so you take all the shoreline. Brazil's got lots of beaches, right? Lima, Peru, lots of beaches. Florida, all the way up to Canada. Okay, there's a lot of sand on Earth. And he said, well, let's use that number for the amount of accounts. So that number's a big number. It's like 2 to the 80th, okay? That's a pretty damn big number, right? So if I had the number of accounts be the number of sand, and then what would happen is you can go out and grab a piece of sand and that's your account number. And what he was thinking is that the odds of someone else reaching for that same piece of sand are so low that I wouldn't even need to check if someone already had that account number. Okay, so it's very unlikely with all that sand. Think of how thick sand is and how much there is in the ocean and all that. What are the odds that someone else who wants to use Bitcoin is going to use a piece of sand? And then he's like, well, maybe it could happen. Let's raise that number. So he took that number and he said, what if I made each one of those pieces of grains of sand its own earth? And I've seen this idea done very well on another video, which I'll show right here. So each grain of sand is its own earth. So each one makes another earth. And then I'll take all the sand from all those earths and I'll make that the number of accounts, 2 to the 160. And this number is big. And in fact, if you want to say that number, this number is this number right here. And it's likely you've never seen a number like that. 1 quintillion, 461 quattordecillion, 501 tridecillion, all the way down to 932,542,976. This is a very, 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 very big number. And so the number of all accounts in the Bitcoin system, he's provided so many that it's mathematically improbable for you to pick one that someone's already used. And again, he's playing the actuary game, right? He's basically saying, what are the odds that by Brownian motion, the table is going to move 1 foot? Brownian motion doesn't move tables 1 foot that anyone's ever seen. Okay? Very, very unlikely. And this is going to drive some people crazy because what it means is that you don't need to connect to the internet to create your account. You could roll dice, and we're going to do this in one of our videos. We're going to roll hexy dice and create a Bitcoin account, and we're going to use that account to send money to. What if someone else is rolling that same number 3 doors down? He's saying that's impossible because of probability. Okay, so when you think that Bitcoin is simple, when you think that Bitcoin is just this stupid little invention that some guy just did in an hour, think again. This was a career move. This was him reading all the time. He spent years and years thinking about it and building it, and he was bright. Okay, so he had to put together inventions, probability, programming, economics, financial history, and put it all together into this one thing, which he gave this crazy name called Bitcoin. So he's creating a new account for everyone on Earth and everyone on every other Earth there could possibly be in the future. And you're not going to run into the same account as someone else. So let's go back to our beginning page here, right? So he's giving accounts to everybody in this actuary dream, right? What is the possibility that someone will run into that exact same moment? And what he's saying is it's not going to happen, right? This is the actuary impossibility. Okay, we've looked at the double spending problem. We've looked at minting coins. Okay, so now we have to look at updating the ledger. And we've already talked about this a little bit, so we're a little prepped for this idea. But everybody knows if you're running a company and you've got a ledger and you let your accountant do the ledger and he has any way of siphoning even 10 cents a transaction off to his own account, he's going to do it, right? As some people have said, if your accountant's only stealing 5%, then he's a good accountant. You need to keep him. So ledger and updating, who controls the flow of all the currency in Bitcoin? And remember that Bitcoin is proposing to take over the currencies of the world. We're talking about every transaction anywhere on Earth fitting into this Bitcoin system. Is it scalable? Well, that's a big question. But if it's scalable, who's updating the ledger? And again, what he did is he distributed this to everybody who is working on the system. And what they're doing, and these people are called the miners. And it's not a very good analogy because it's like saying, okay, you guys, there's gold over there in those hills, and they start mining, right? And they're digging away because all they care about is getting gold. But you manage somehow to turn their arm movements into something that will do good for the world, okay? So if you were able to turn their arm movements into solving some sort of genetic code for disease, then the mining analogy might be good. If you were able to turn their arm movements into monitoring all incoming and outgoing transactions of the US dollars, then mining would be fully understandable because that's what miners do. They're monitoring, though they don't know it because they're not even really mining. They're just putting their computer to work, right? Their computers get hot as they're mining. And what they're doing is they're getting all the incoming transactions. They're going, do I agree with all the other computers whether these incoming transactions are valid? If yes, go. That's fine. That transaction was fine. If I happen to agree in a way that's faster than everybody else and get an approval faster, I might even get paid for it. So they're running this weird little lottery. So mining's a terrible analogy, and who cares? But what he's doing again is he's letting everybody in the network decide if that one transaction is true. Okay? If they all come to a consensus, then we draw a new line here. So he's avoiding the accountant, but he's not avoiding the expense of the account. Satoshi actually understood that he had to incentivize people. So what he's doing is all the miners are participating in this lottery, and the current price for winning this lottery, which runs every 10 minutes, is 25 Bitcoins, right? So every 10 minutes, he's running a lottery that's over $10,000, and that incentivizes our accounting. It incentivizes the miners to turn their computers on and keep it running. Well, that looks a lot at our next problem, right? And if we get through this, we've understood most of the major problems of building a digital currency. And we talk about this in our Why is Mining video. But again, if you're creating a currency and you print a paper one, well, you really don't worry if someone gives $5 to someone else. Well, that other person has the money. You don't have to ask a digital ledger because you're not overly concerned about every transaction you do with dollars that someone's handing you a dollar they've just copied. It happens, but you're not going to ask the internet for it. You're going to look at the dollar and try and make sure it's got all the things it needs. With digital, because anyone can make perfect copies, you have to ask every time you make a transaction whether the network agrees. Okay, and if you have to ask every time, well, you run into a really big problem if no one's got their computers on at the moment. So if no one is playing this mining game, right? If no one's going, digging for those coins, but at the same time verifying your transactions, well, then Bitcoin fails, and it fails in 10 seconds, right? And you hear this all the time. Well, Bitcoin's horrible because if all the internet goes down, it's over, right? If all the internet goes down, everything's over, right? The federal government, everybody's poured all their industry and all their ideas into the internet, right? All communications now happen over the internet. You can run the internet from a solar panel and build your own server. So it's pretty unlikely the internet's going to go down. But what Satoshi had to worry about was whether Bitcoin would go down because people weren't mining. And he solved that by using this very lottery, right? By giving out $10,000 every 10 minutes, well, people somewhere are going to be turning their computers on to run the transactions. And all you need is one computer, okay? There are hundreds of thousands. So it seems pretty unlikely that the server is ever going to unplug, right? If you go to the bank pays to turn the lights on and the air conditioning. When you walk in, there's someone waiting there, right? They manage that. They put a big investment into maintaining the banking services that you need to do banking. Bitcoin does have a similar investment responsibility, and that's done through this mining. And better believe there's a lot of electrons being spit around the earth because of Bitcoins, right? Some say that Bitcoin is using $1 million worth of electricity a day. And it's a nightmare if you're an environmentalist, which I am. But these other systems, banking and all that, are very expensive on the environment as well. So hopefully Bitcoins will solve that problem and we'll love it even more. But that's it. We've looked at the major problems of creating a currency. And if you want to create your own currency, you now know what to do. Please like, comment, subscribe, send a hug, do whatever it takes. We'll check you out at the next video.